The night I pressed $400 into a young woman's hand across a white tablecloth. My coffee had already gone cold, twice. I'd been sitting in the corner of that restaurant since 5:15, nursing a club soda and a slice of lemon, watching the door, watching the man who married my daughter pull out a chair for his brand new wife the way he once pulled out a chair for my Tessa. You don't forget a thing like that. The way a man's hand rests on the small of a woman's back when he's already decided what he's going to take from her. Let me back up, because if I just start in the middle, you'll think I'm one of those confused old ladies people apologize for and steer toward the exit. I'm 67. I worked 31 years as a bookkeeper for a furniture company out on Route 9, and I balanced ledgers to the penny every single quarter, and I am telling you, I am not confused about one thing that happened that fall. 2 years before that dinner, my daughter died. Tessa was 34. She had her father's laugh and my stubbornness and the little condo near the river that her grandmother left her free and clear. She met a man at a hardware store of all places. He was buying picture hooks, she was buying a new shower head, and he made her laugh in the checkout line. And 3 months later, she called me crying happy tears because he'd asked her to marry him on the pedestrian bridge downtown with the lights coming on over the water. I met him exactly 4 times. He called me by my first name and brought me a poinsettia at Christmas and helped me carry my groceries up the porch steps. And the whole time, something in the back of my neck stayed cold, and I told myself I was just a jealous old woman who didn't want to share her only girl. They married at the courthouse in April. By June, she had signed her condo over to him to refinance into something bigger, she told me on the phone, breezy as anything, because he'd handled the paperwork and she trusted him. By July, they took a weekend trip up to a lake I'd never heard of, and on Sunday, the sheriff's department called me to say my daughter had drowned, that there'd been wine involved, that the boat had tipped in choppy water and her husband had tried and tried to reach her and couldn't. He stood at her funeral in a charcoal suit and wept into a handkerchief, and 3 different women, I didn't know, patted his shoulder. And the pastor said something about God's mysteries. 6 weeks later, he sold her condo. The sale went through clean as a whistle. I know because I asked. And here's the part where everybody decided I was the crazy one. I didn't believe a word of it. Not the wine, not the choppy water, not the heroic husband. My Tessa could swim like a fish. I taught her myself at the Y when she was 6, so I started doing the only thing a bookkeeper knows how to do when the numbers don't add up. I started keeping records. I went to the county courthouse and I pulled the deed transfer. I requested the incident report, what little they'd give me. I wrote down dates. And then, because I am patient in the way that grief makes you patient, I started watching him. It took me the better part of 2 years and a lot of cheap drugstore reading glasses, but I built a list. He wasn't a one-time thing. There'd been a widow on the east side 3 years back whose grown kids still didn't understand how the family house ended up titled to a stranger. There'd been a woman who supposedly took too many of her own pills. Each time, the same pattern: a charming man appears, a marriage or a business partnership happens fast, a property changes hands, and then an accident, an overdose, a disappearance. And every single one of those deeds had been recorded and stamped at the county recorder's office without a single hiccup. The recorder's office. You want to know who runs that office? His mother does. Deputy County Recorder, 22 years. Citizen of the Year 2 times over, sat on the library board and the hospital foundation and smiled out of the local paper every other month in a string of pearls. She controlled the very records that would have proven the fraud. She could make a forged deed look like scripture. So that's who I was watching that night in the restaurant. Not the boy. The boy was just the pretty face on the front of the operation. I was watching the woman who wasn't there yet, the one pulling every string from behind a county seal. But the boy was there, and so was she, the new one. A girl, really, to my eyes. Mid-30s, dark curls pinned up. A green dress she clearly didn't get to wear often. The kind of nervous glow a woman gets 2 weeks into believing her luck has finally turned. And I knew her face. That's the thing that nearly stopped my heart. I knew her. She ran the little bakery over on Lindell, the one with the cinnamon rolls I drove out of my way for every Saturday. Naomi, her name was. It was painted right there on the window, Naomi's, in cheerful blue script. She always remembered I liked the corner piece with the extra glaze. She'd lost both her folks young, same as my Tessa was about to be lost to me, and she had that same wide-open, trusting face that the wolves in this world can smell from a mile off. When I saw who she was sitting across from, I went into that restroom and I threw up my club soda. Then I came back out and I made myself a plan, the way you do when you've already decided you have nothing left to be afraid of. He stepped out around 8. His phone lit up in his pocket and a flicker of irritation crossed his face. I'd seen that exact flicker on him at Tessa's birthday dinner, and he leaned over, kissed Naomi on the forehead, said something about business and the lobby and 2 minutes, and walked toward the doors with that easy, expensive stride. I didn't have 2 minutes. I had maybe 90 seconds. I got up too fast, knocked my own chair, and the room tilted for a second, the way it does at my age. I crossed to her table. She looked up, polite, a little startled, already half smiling the way you smile at somebody's grandmother. I had the cash folded in my fist. Everything I'd taken out of the ATM that afternoon because some animal part of me knew I might need it. I pressed it into her palm and I closed her fingers over it and I leaned down so close I could smell her perfume. "Listen to me, honey, and don't make a face," I said. "There's a window in the ladies' room. Call a cab right now and climb out of it. The man you married killed my daughter, and there are 2 men coming through that front door for you right now." She thought I was insane. Of course she did. Her eyes went to the bills, then to my face, and she started to say I must have her mixed up with someone, and I told her I didn't, that I knew her from the bakery, that her cinnamon rolls were the best in the county, and I would not be standing here saying these words if I weren't sure. And then her eyes went past my shoulder to the front of the restaurant, and every drop of color left her face. 2 men had come in. Not diners. They didn't look at the host stand or the tables, they looked at her. Big, blank-faced, in dark jackets that didn't fit the room, scanning, settling. One of them had a build like he used to play ball and stopped caring. They were 30 feet away and they were not there for the prime rib. She told me afterward what happened next, and I'll tell it the way she told me, because by the time I'd squeezed her hand, I was already drifting back to my own table so the boy wouldn't catch me, and I sat there with my heart slamming, watching her run. She ran. She grabbed her bag and went down the back hall to the ladies' room and through the bowl and stood with her back against the door, shaking so hard she dropped her phone twice before she got the rideshare app open. There was a window, all right, up near the ceiling, frosted glass. She climbed up on the marble counter in her green dress and her good shoes to reach it, and that's when she saw the iron bars set into the frame. No way out that way. Somebody had thought of that. Somebody had thought of that. Somebody had been bringing women into that restaurant for a long time. A car was 4 minutes out. She climbed down and she heard a key turn in the lock from the outside. The host, the man in the good suit who'd been bowing and scraping to her husband all night, had locked her in. And then through the door, soft and reasonable as a man calming a spooked horse, she heard her husband's voice. "It's all right. She's just overwhelmed. She gets like this. Give us a minute." She told me the worst sound of her life was that gentle, patient lie. But Naomi, bless her, was not the kind to sit and wait for the wolves. On the wall by the door was one of those red fire alarm poles behind a little pane of glass. She didn't have anything to break it with, but the heavy brass buckle on her purse strap, so she swung it like a girl who used to play softball. And on the third swing, the glass cracked, and she pulled that handle down, and the whole building started to scream. She said the siren was the most beautiful thing she ever heard. People panicked. Somebody actually had burned something in the kitchen with all the commotion, so there was real smoke. And in the chaos, the host had to unlock the door before the fire marshal arrived to find a woman locked in a bathroom. She shoved past him, and she went through that dining room like a fullback, right past her husband, whose face, she said this part with a shudder, whose face had nothing on it anymore. No charm, no worry, just cold arithmetic, watching his investment walk out the door. She didn't go home. Smart girl. She gave the cab her bakery's address because the shop was the only place in the world that felt like hers. It was hers, by the way. She leased the storefront, but she owned the business, the ovens, the name on the window, every recipe in it. I want to be clear about that because later they would try to take even that from her and pretend she'd never had it. She let herself in the back, bolted every lock, sank down on the little couch in her office, and once the shaking eased enough that her hands worked, she did the first sensible thing. She opened her bank's app to move her savings somewhere he couldn't reach. She had a separate account, money she'd been squirreling away for a second oven. The transfer bounced back red, account frozen, suspicious activity reported by the joint account holder, her lawful husband. He'd done it that very evening, probably while she was still smiling at him over the appetizers. He hadn't just wanted to scare her, he'd wanted to leave her with nothing, fast, while she still thought the worst thing in her life was a misunderstanding. She tried again. Same red wall. And then it really sank in for her. If he knew she'd run and he knew her, then he knew the shop was the second place she'd go. So she gathered up the cash I'd given her, locked the shop behind her, and took another cab to the last place she had, the little apartment over on the north end where she'd lived since before her parents passed. Her key wouldn't go on the lock, neither would the spare. Something jammed in both. She found out later they'd snapped a key off inside on purpose. She knocked, then pounded, then started yelling, and a neighbor cracked her door, and right then, the apartment door opened and a complete stranger stood there in a bathrobe with the smell of fried onions behind her, asking who on earth was making all that racket at this hour and who Naomi thought she was. And while Naomi stood there with her mouth open, her husband came up the stairs with his mother, pearls and a camel coat, the deputy recorder herself, the very picture of a respectable woman dragged out of her evening to deal with an unfortunate situation. They put on a show for the whole hallway. The boy, sorrowful, explaining that his poor wife had been under so much strain that they'd come to bring her home and get her some rest. The mother, taking Naomi's arm with fingers like ice, murmuring that everyone just wanted to help. The renter in the bathrobe confirming she had a signed lease from the property's owner. And when Naomi screamed that this was her home, her parents' home, the boy opened a leather folder, slid out a recorded quitclaim deed, and held it up under the hallway light so all the neighbors could see. And there, at the bottom, was Naomi's own signature, clear as day. She'd signed it herself. 2 nights earlier, he'd come to her with a stack of wedding paperwork, just formalities. And she'd signed where the little flags were stuck, without reading, because she loved him and trusted him, and who reads every page their own husband puts in front of them? The signature wasn't forged. That's the cruelty of it. She'd handed them her whole life with a pen, smiling, thinking she was being a good wife. The neighbors looked at her differently after that. A respectable official, a grieving, documented husband, a signed and recorded deed against a wild-eyed woman in a wrinkled green dress who couldn't get into her own door. You could see them deciding. She tore her arm out of the mother's grip and she ran down the stairs and out into the cold, and she didn't stop for blocks. I know all of this because around midnight my phone rang, and it was her. She'd kept my number from the bakery, from some delivery thing months before, and mine was the only name in her contacts that belonged to someone who already knew her husband was a monster. She told me everything in pieces, sobbing, and I sat in my kitchen in my robe and I listened. And when she finally ran out of words, I said 3 things. You're not crazy. None of this is your fault. Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you. I found her at a roadside motel off the interstate, the kind with a buzzing ice machine and a Bible in the drawer, where the night clerk took her cash and didn't ask questions. She opened the door with the chain still on, peered out, and when she saw it was just an old woman, she let me in, and then she put her face in her hands and cried like a child. I took her home with me. I made her tea. She didn't drink, and toast she didn't eat. And on my mantel and my hallway walls were the photographs. Tessa at 6 with her swim ribbon. Tessa in her graduation gown. Tessa laughing with an armful of grocery store flowers. Naomi stared at them. and I sat down across from her at my kitchen table, and I told her the whole thing. Who he was, what he'd done to my girl. The widow, the pills, the deeds, all of it stamped and sealed and made legal by a woman the whole city trusted. I told her she'd been number 8, or thereabouts, on a list I'd been building for 2 years, and that she was the first one I'd ever managed to warn in time. She was quiet a long while. Then she said the thing I've been waiting 2 years to hear somebody else say out loud. They can't get away with this. They have been getting away with it, I told her, for years. Because every road leads back to that office, and she owns that office. We go to the police, they make a call to the recorder to verify the deed, and the recorder is her. She hands them a certified copy of your own signature and tells them you're a troubled woman, and they thank her for her time, and they open a file on you. I've watched it happen. Twice. Then we need something they can't explain away, she said. Something that doesn't go through her office. And right then, I'm not going to lie, a tired old spark in me caught fire. For 2 years, I'd been the only one who believed. Now there were 2 of us. We needed proof that this was a system, not a sad coincidence. Names, addresses, dates, a pattern no jury could squint past. And I had nothing but a notebook full of public records anyone could dismiss. It was Naomi who got us our way in, though it cost her dearly. She called her assistant from the bakery, a shy, sweet girl named Trina, who'd worked the early shift for 3 years and who, when Naomi told her the truth, didn't hesitate for a second. Trina's cousin cleaned the county building at night, and Trina knew something the rest of the city didn't. She doesn't keep the real records in the computer, Trina told her, low and scared, when they met in a parking lot 2 days later. My cousin's seen it. She's got a green book, like an old accounting ledger. She keeps it in her office, and she's paranoid about it. Won't even let the cleaners near her desk. And then Trina pressed something cold into Naomi's hand and folded her fingers shut, the very way I'd done in the restaurant, and whispered, "Don't tell anybody where you got this." It was a key to the office door. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this is the part where reasonable people start shaking their heads. We were a 67-year-old bookkeeper and a baker, and we sat at my kitchen table and we planned to break into a county building at night. I know how that sounds, but you tell me what reasonable looks like when the people who enforce the law are the ones breaking it, and the woman holding the rubber stamp can erase you. We didn't have a good option. We had one option. So we waited until the city went quiet, and we drove down there a little before midnight in my old sedan, and we parked 2 blocks away and walked. Trina had told us where the staff door was, around the back by the loading dock, and that the cleaning crew came on around 12 and usually propped it open. We hid behind a dumpster, 2 women in dark coats, and my knees ached something fierce. And around 12:15, 2 women in work vests came out for a smoke and wedged the door with a chunk of broken brick and wandered off around the corner. We slipped through. Inside it was all long fluorescent halls and the smell of industrial cleaner and, somewhere far off, the drone of a floor buffer. Naomi went first, light on her feet. I came behind, one hand on the wall. We found the stairwell, climbed to the 3rd floor. That took something out of me, I'll admit. And there it was, the door with her name on a brass plate. Deputy County Recorder. The key turned silent and smooth. Her office was the cleanest room I've ever stood in. Not a paper out of place, not a photo of a grandchild, not a coffee ring. Just a polished desk and a whole wall of framed awards and photographs of her shaking hands with men in suits. The room of a person who has decided that the appearance of virtue is the same thing as virtue. We searched. Naomi went through the desk, I went through the bookcase, and 20 minutes ticked by with nothing: official binders, statute books, a pen cup, no green ledger anywhere. We were starting to think Trina had been wrong, or that she'd moved it, and the panic was rising in both of us when I stepped back from that wall of fame to catch my breath. And I noticed something. One of the photographs hung crooked. In that room where everything was perfect, where the woman couldn't bear a coffee ring, one large frame, her shaking hands with the mayor, sat a hair off, true, A bookkeeper notices when one number in a column is out of line. I reached up and instead of straightening it, I pulled it, and it swung out from the wall on a hinge. And behind it sat a little wall safe with a combination dial. "We'll never crack it," Naomi whispered. "But I've been thinking about this woman for 2 years. I knew her the way you know your enemy. Better than her friends did. A person that paranoid doesn't use her grandkid's birthday. She doesn't even like her grandkids. She uses something she'll never forget, something that means more to her than any person." And right there on the wall, in a brass plaque, was the answer staring at me. The year the county recorder's office was founded, the institution she'd spent her whole life burrowing into like a tick. I turned the dial to those 4 numbers, slow, my fingers not quite steady, and the lock gave a soft, fat click and the little door swung open. Inside, on a single shelf, sat a battered green ledger. I lifted it out and set it on her spotless desk and opened it, and I had to grip the edge of that desk to stay on my feet. It was laid out like the books I'd kept my whole working life. Neat columns: name, property, acquirer, status. And down the acquirer column, the same name written over and over in a tidy hand, her son's name. And down the status column, in that same calm penmanship, relocated, accident, settled, overdose, no inquiry, accident, estate clear. My Tessa was the fourth line, her condo address, the word accident, the phrase property realized. There were 8 names, 8 women and 1 widower, going back 6 years, each one with a deed, a date, and a death or a disappearance, each one sealed with the office's own certification. Naomi was the 8th and last, and where the others said settled or realized, hers said in that same even hand, in progress. That's what we were to them. Line items. My daughter was a closed account and Naomi was an open one. Naomi was already pulling out her phone. "We can't take it. They'll know the second it's gone. Photograph every page." Her hand shook so the first few came out blurred and she had to redo them. The shutter clicked loud as a gunshot in that silent office, and I stood guard at her shoulder turning the pages, and we were maybe halfway through when we both went rigid. Footsteps in the hall, not the shuffle of a cleaner. Fast, hard, certain, coming straight for the door. The key turned. The door swung open, and there he stood, my son-in-law, out of his fine suit now, in a black sweater and jeans, and without the costume he looked exactly like what he was. He took in the open safe, the ledger on the desk, the 2 of us, and behind him, crumpled against the wall in the hallway, sobbing, was poor Trina. They'd gotten to her cousin, threatened her family, made her tell them where we'd be. His face came apart. No charm left, not a scrap of it. "You two," he said, and the hate in it raised the hair on my arms, "have ruined everything." He came at Naomi because Naomi had the phone and he was fast. He grabbed her wrist and twisted it till she cried out and the phone hit the carpet, and he got a fistful of her hair, snarling something foul into her face. And I knew with absolute clarity that this was the moment he'd done before in a different room to my girl. So I picked up the heavy crystal pitcher off her sideboard and I brought it down on the back of his head with everything 67 years had left in me. It didn't break. It just made a sound I'll hear till I die. A dull, wet crack, and his knees went. And he let go of Naomi and went down across that immaculate carpet, and I stood over him shaking with the pitcher still in my hand. And Naomi grabbed her phone off the floor and grabbed me by the arm and pulled. We ran past Trina, who was wailing apologies, down the stairwell, and behind us I heard him bellowing for security for the men who didn't wear uniforms. We hit the first floor, and the main doors were chained for the night, and we heard them coming down the stairs above us. And Naomi yanked open a janitor's closet under the staircase and pushed me inside among the mops and the chemical smell. And then she did the thing I will never stop being grateful for and never stop aching over. She didn't get in with me. She stood in the doorway and she pressed her phone into my hand, the phone with all 8 names on it, and she said, fast and fierce, "You're the one they'll believe. It's your daughter in that book. The Chamber Gala is tomorrow at noon at the Civic Center. She's getting Citizen of the Year again. You get there and you put this in front of every camera in that room. I'll slow them down." "No," I said. "No, you come with me. We go together." "They're looking for the woman with the phone and the people who saw the book," she said. "If I'm out here being loud, they're not looking for an old lady in a closet." And she gave me a smile I'll see when I close my eyes, a baker's smile, the one she gave me over the corner piece with the extra glaze. And she shut the door, and I heard the bolt slide and her voice ring out down the hall. "Hey, over here!" And the footsteps thundered after her instead of toward me. I stood in that dark closet all night long. I didn't dare make a sound. I held that phone to my chest like it was a living thing, and I listened to my own breathing, and somewhere far off there were raised voices, and then there wasn't anything at all. In the morning, when the early cleaning crew came on and grumbled about the closet locks sticking, I tapped on the door and told the woman I'd gotten locked in by accident. And she was so flustered she let me slip right out into the morning rush of clerks and never thought to stop me. I walked out the front door of that building into the gray daylight, a free woman, with 8 names in my pocket and no idea whether the girl who put them there was alive. I had hours. I didn't waste them. I went to a copy shop and I spent the last of my cash and Naomi's printing every page off that phone, big and clear and on good paper, 5 full sets, because a thing on a screen can be doubted, but a thing in your hand on glossy paper while 100 people watch is a different animal. Then I called my daughter's friends, the women who'd loved her, and I called a man whose father's name was line 1 in that ledger. I tracked him down months back, a quiet fellow who fixed transmissions and had never once believed his dad just wandered off. I told him to come to the Civic Center at noon and to bring anyone he could find who'd lost somebody after a man came courting fast and a deed changed hands. And I went home and put on my good navy dress, the one I'd worn to Tessa's funeral, and I took her graduation photo out of its frame on the mantel and I tucked it under my arm. The gala was everything you'd imagine. Velvet seats, an orchestra, the mayor on the dais, and there she sat among the dignitaries in a cream suit and her pearls, the deputy recorder, citizen of the year, smiling and nodding at her admirers, while the city she'd been quietly hunting clapped for her. I walked in late, on purpose, when the room was full. An usher reached for my elbow and I walked right past him down the center aisle, an old woman in a funeral dress with a photograph under her arm, and people began to turn, and the orchestra faltered, and up on the stage her smile froze into something carved out of ice. She leaned and murmured to a man at the edge of the platform, and 2 big fellows in suits stepped into the aisle to block me, and I stopped, 30 feet from the stage, with the whole room staring. And then, from the 3rd row, a man stood up, the one who fixed transmissions. He didn't shout. He said it plain and heavy, into all that silence, looking right at her on the stage. "Let her talk. My father's in that book too." You could have heard a pin drop. The cameras that had been pointed at the dais swung around to him, then back to me, and the security men hesitated, because their orders had been to remove a crazy old woman, and a crazy old woman and a with a witness is a different problem. I took that half second of confusion and I walked past the frozen guards, up the 3 steps, and I took the microphone right out of the startled MC's hand. In the front row, my son-in-law shot to his feet, a white bandage showing under his hair where I'd laid him out, his face purple. "She's deranged," he yelled. "Somebody call the police. She attacked me. She's been harassing my family for years." The police. That was exactly what I wanted. I lifted the microphone and I said in a voice that carried to the back of that hall because 30 years of grief will put steel in you, "My name is the mother of Tessa." I gave her name, my daughter's name, and I said it slow so they'd remember it. 2 years ago, this man married my girl, and 1 month later, he drowned her in a lake and inherited the home her grandmother left her. And he was able to do it. I turned and looked right at the woman in the cream suit, because his mother stamped it legal. The room erupted and the woman in pearls was on her feet screaming slander, lawsuit, lies, and I held up the first glossy page so the cameras could drink it in, those neat damning columns, and I started to read. Line 1, the father of the man standing in the aisle, vanished. His house sold by my son-in-law. Line 2. Line 3. And when I reached line 4 and said my own daughter's name and the word accident in that ledger's own handwriting, I held up her graduation photograph high over my head. And at the very back of the hall, the doors banged open and my daughter's friends and the transmission man's family came pouring in carrying more pictures, more faces, and the room broke wide open. A woman in the back stood and cried out that line. 5 was her sister. A man shouted that he'd wondered for years about his neighbors who moved away so sudden. 20 years that woman spent building a name, and it came down in about 4 minutes flat. The mayor went gray as ash, realized he was sitting on a stage next to the thing the whole room was now screaming about, and turned to the police chief beside him in his dress uniform and said something sharp and pointed. I lowered the microphone. I'd said what I came to say. I walked down off that stage and across to the chief, and I put a full set of those glossy pages in his hands, and I told him there were photographs of every original on a phone, and his face got darker with every sheet he turned, and then he gave his men a look and a nod. They put the cuffs on her right there in her cream suit, and she shrieked about her connections and her years of service, and not one soul in that room came to help her. They caught the boy trying to push out a side exit, and he did not go quiet. He had to be dragged. And as they walked her past me toward the doors, she turned her head and looked at me, and there was nothing left in her eyes but pure, hopeless hatred. And I held her gaze, and I did not look away, because I'd earned the right to watch. Naomi was alive. They'd held her overnight in a county lockup on a trumped-up charge of assault and trespassing. But with the whole story breaking across every channel in the state by sundown, the district attorney himself ordered her released the next morning and dropped every word of it. The first thing she did was drive to my house and stand on my porch and put her arms around me, and we held onto each other on that porch for a long time. 2 women who'd been told they were crazy, neither one of us crazy at all. It took a few months and a special prosecutor, but every deed that family ever touched got unwound. Naomi got her apartment back and her bakery and her savings. The man who fixed transmissions got his father's case reopened. And my Tessa's death stopped being an accident in the county's records and became what it always was. I won't pretend it gave her back to me. Nothing does that. There's a chair at my table that stays empty and a swim ribbon on my wall that I can't look at some mornings. But I'll tell you what I've come to know, sitting here on the far side of all of it, an old woman who once balanced other people's books for a living and ended up balancing one terrible ledger of her own. The men who smile the widest are sometimes counting the days until they can bury you. And the world will look at a frightened woman and a tired old lady and decide we don't count, that we're confused, that we should be quietly led toward the exit. We are not as easy to erase as they think. If you're out there right now and somebody's told you you're imagining it, that you're too old or too rattled or too alone to be believed, keep your own records, honey. Write down the dates. There is always a way out of the locked room, even if you have to break the glass yourself. And living proof an old woman can bring down an empire with a copy machine and a green book and one good swing. And every Saturday now, I still drive across town for the corner piece with the extra glaze. Naomi never lets me pay. There's a chair at my kitchen table that nobody sits in anymore, and most mornings I can walk right past it. Some mornings I can't. That empty chair taught me more about how the world really works than 31 years of balancing other people's books ever did. I used to think evil announced itself. I thought a man who could drown my Tessa for a deed would have something rotten you could see on his face. He didn't. He had a poinsettia at Christmas and a hand under my elbow on the porch steps. That was the whole trick. The men who take the most from us are almost always the ones who smile the widest while they do it. And the longer I live, the more I believe that a person's true measure is in what they do when they think no one's keeping records. So I kept records. When the kindest thing I could do for my daughter was refuse to look away from a thing everyone else found easier to call an accident, I learned that doing right is rarely the comfortable road. It cost me 2 years of being the crazy old woman. It was worth every cold reading glasses night. But being right wasn't enough, and I want you to hear that, because nobody tells you that part. Wanting justice didn't crack that safe. Paying attention did. I noticed one crooked photograph in a room where a woman couldn't stand a coffee ring, and I guessed a combination because I'd studied my enemy harder than her own friends ever bothered to. That's not luck. That's the habit of looking carefully at what's in front of you and refusing to accept the easy story. You sharpen that the same way. You sharpen anything by using it on small things every day until it's ready for the day that matters. And then there's the part where your knees ache and your hands shake and you do the frightening thing anyway. When Trina pressed that key into my hand, when Naomi shut me in that closet and walked toward the danger so I could walk toward the danger so I could walk toward the cameras, neither of us felt brave. We felt terrified. Courage was never the absence of that fear. It was breaking the glass with your purse buckle on the third swing because the first two didn't work and stopping was not an option. If you take one thing from an old bookkeeper who brought down an empire with a copy machine and a green ledger, let it be this. Keep your records, sharpen your noticing, and when the locked room comes, and it comes for all of us eventually, do not wait for someone stronger to break the glass. You are not as easy to erase as they think you are. I have the corner piece with the extra glaze every Saturday to prove it.